How would it feel to cross the sea in a boat and it took 6 weeks?
I would probably kiss the ground after I came off the boat.
Not in New York, you wouldn't. We hope you've been having a fun Christmas holiday. I certainly have. Chloe, what have you been up to over the break?
Oh, not much.
Well, we thought we'd do something a little bit different today. We're ready to talk about our next girl in the American Girls book series that came out when I was a kid.
In the olden days.
We'll be talking about Kirsten Larson, who lives in 1854 and goes from Sweden to Minnesota.
I absolutely love Kirsten's hair. It is braided and then it is looped in circles and tied up with a blue bow. I love also how she has a fringe, and I love how it's always inside one style. You don't have to worry about, oh, do I want this today, or oh, do I want that the other day.
It is very practical. I mean, if you're a pioneer, you need hair that's going to be out of the way. They didn't have a lot of the hair products that we have today, and so keeping your hair neat and clean was super important. And it also looked really cute. So we thought today we would talk about Kirsten Larson while doing a little tutorial so that if you've ever wanted to try out those fun looped braids, you can too. Now, I recommend that you do start with hair that isn't too clean, because if it is, then it'll be too slippy and it might not hold very well. So like hair that's been washed yesterday or even the day before can be good. And you might want to do something like, say, add a little mousse or a touch of hair wax, but that kind of depends on how thick your hair is. Chloe's hair is lovely and fabulous and thick, fabulous and thick, fabulous and thick, lovely and fabulous and thick. So I'm just going to add a little bit of hair wax to it so it has some grip. So as I get started, let's talk about Kirsten from the very beginning. She comes from Sweden. The book doesn't say exactly where, but that's not super important, although you do get the impression that she came from a rural area because her family clearly have skills in farming, and it doesn't mention in the book about her being from a big city. So, Chloe, you know what it's like to be a little girl who moves from one country to another country, but you were very lucky in that your journey was very different from Kirsten's, and the problems you faced when you got here were different and a bit easier.
Her ship journey was months, and she had a train journey that lasted about 2-3 days or a week. They couldn't hire a wagon, so they had to walk 10 miles.
10 whole miles.
Back to where the farm was.
But what do you think about the journey itself? Now, when we moved from America to England, we went on an airplane. Did you ever feel like you were in danger while we were on our trip?
I'd say ours was a lot more safer.
Yeah, definitely.
Because we were on an airplane that had been built by professionals and was run by, like, I don't know how many people.
Well, now, the boat they would have been on would have been very well built. But what they can't control is the weather, huh? What happens in the first chapter when they're sailing over?
A really bad storm comes.
Yeah. And then how does everyone feel during the storm?
Sad.
Yeah, because they're seasick. They don't feel very well. It took weeks to cross the Atlantic Ocean on a boat, and it could be really dangerous. If a really big storm comes, that can be it. You're done. So now I've parted Chloe's hair, and what I'm just going to do is brush each side really far forward toward her ear. You want it kind of just above the ear, sort of between the temple and the top of the ear. Then now that I've got the hair pushed forward, I'm just going to braid it like normal. It works best if you start from the back first instead of this piece up by the front. So take this back piece and start that way. It'll make the braid look nicer when you do the loop. How did you feel when Kirsten's best friend Marta died of cholera?
I actually felt really surprised because, like, seriously, imagine if you had been friends with this person for ages and then they just disappeared.
I think that these days children's books kind of steer away from that. Like, they're kind of almost afraid to go near the subject of death, but in the 1800s, it was still really common for children to die. I mean, it's very sad, but it's also part of history. So I'm finishing this braid. Now Chloe's hair is very long and it has some layers built into it. So to help me out later on, I'm going to use one of these little invisible rubber bands to just stop the braid right there. Otherwise I'll have all of these strange odd ends poking out of it. When Kirsten arrives in Minnesota, she's really anxious about the fact that she can't speak English. Could you imagine what it would have been like on your first day of school here if you didn't speak a single word of English?
I think I would probably have to have like a teacher assistant who knew my language to come and explain everything for me and teach me like a few words, like common phrases like yes, no, and can I go to the bathroom?
Do you remember when the war in Ukraine started and then some Ukrainian kids came to your school and they didn't speak any English at all? Well, there were the two little boys who spoke a tiny bit because they learned a few phrases in school back in Ukraine. But remember there was the one girl who came who she didn't speak any English at all. How do you think she felt?
Actually on her first day she was having a lot of fun. She was playing a running game where it was tag. She knew tag, and all the other kids did as well. And she had 4 friends, and they learned a bit of Ukrainian. So they could communicate with her, and they helped her inside her lessons.
So do you think that Kirsten felt a lot of the same way when she got to the farm and she had her 2 cousins that she hadn't met before, and they were kind and they accepted her and they could kind of help her with English and Swedish at the same time?
Yeah.
How do you think Kirsten would have felt if she hadn't had family members her own age to help her settle into her community?
I think she would struggle quite a lot, and she would probably have to be homeschooled.
This charming look is what we're going for. It's a bit too far forward and kind of goofy looking to just leave it like this, but you'll see once we loop them up, we get this nice, beautiful circular shape. So I do have this little extra tail of hair. There's a couple of ways that you could deal with that if you're braiding very long hair. You could try tucking it up underneath. I'm going to try something real quick where I integrate it into the rest of the braid. So you can see how I'm just kind of working this little tail in here with the braids that I've already done. If you've put a little bit of wax on the hair, it really, really helps it grip and not slip back out again. Okay, there we go. We've got our little loop, and now I'll do the other side. Since it's Christmas time, we thought we'd talk a little bit about Kirsten's surprise. Now, this is the book where it's winter time, the deep snows have come to Minnesota, and Kirsten is just really, really hoping that her family is finally going to be able to get their trunk full of things that they brought from Sweden.
Inside the book, it says that they bring up a tray of Lucia bolla and coffee. Did the children drink the coffee?
They did. So in the 19th century, children would have drunk things like tea or coffee, but they would have added a lot of milk. But yeah, things were different back then. I know it can seem very strange now because we certainly don't let children do that today. But very, very milky tea or very, very milky coffee wouldn't have really been dangerous for children to have, especially if it wasn't every day. Now, what happens in Kirsten's surprise is that Kirsten and her father go in the wagon to town, and she goes to the store, and the store owner, what's he impressed with when he meets Kirsten? Do you remember?
He said last time that she came to him, she only spoke Swedish.
That's right. So she felt confident to speak in English, and she didn't even realize she was doing it. And that's something that I've heard people say who went from one country to another, is that, eventually they would find themselves just speaking the new language, usually English, in the stories that I've heard, and that sometimes they'd almost be caught off guard, like, oh my gosh, I just spoke English with no problems, and it just popped out. You kind of have these moments where you suddenly realize that you're getting more fluent, and she starts to feel more confident, doesn't she?
But as they leave the store, there's a huge blizzard coming. Papa says that they might be able to beat it home, and they go anyway, but the storm starts. They go on for a few hours, But then Papa hurts his leg near the front, so Kirsten leads Blackie to a cave that she saw earlier with Singing Bird, and they stay there until the storm clears up.
So how do you think you would feel if you were a little kid caught in a horrible blizzard in the middle of winter? There's no phones. There's no cars coming by. There's no snowplows. It's just you and your dad, and he's hurt. Do you think you could get down in the deep snow and lead a frightened horse to safety? It's okay.
If I tried.
If you tried. I think you could too, but how scared would you be?
Terrified.
I'd be terrified. And clearly Mama and the rest of the family were terrified because when they all got home, they were just relieved, weren't they?
Yeah.
It was entirely possible in that situation that they could have never made it home, and that would have been very sad. So you can see I'm adding the ribbons here. I just loop them around the whole thing and just tie a normal bow. And we're using bright red ribbons because we are creating Kirsten's look. This book was always one of my favorites. The cover of the book is so beautiful, and it also has the tradition of Lucia Day. Now, this is on December 13th. It's commonly celebrated in Scandinavia. You should look up some of the videos of Lucia celebrations that happen in places like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and places in America where there's those of Scandinavian descent. There's a Lucia queen who dresses up in a beautiful white dress with a crown of candles, and there's a very lovely song. And it's traditional for the Lucia queen in each family to deliver Lucia bolla or Lucia buns to her family for breakfast in bed.
They get home at about 4 a.m. inside the morning, and everyone is still awake. So they decide to do Lucia Day right now because it is Lucia Day. They ask everyone to close their eyes, and Kirsten comes in with the food, and it's still St. Lucia Day.
I made this belt for Chloe the first time she did Lucia for our family, but I have to say you've grown so much, I'm going to have to weave you a new one, huh? So there you go. This is how you do Kirsten's braids, and this is what Chloe looks like at our house when she's our Lucia queen.
What's your favorite story about Kirsten, and what do you admire about her?
That was fun. You want to go eat some Lucia buns?
Yes.
Can I eat one?